All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We still have a couple of folks trickling in, but we're going to go ahead and get started in the interest of time. My name is Liz Davis, and I am the Director of Special Events at Fordham University. Thank you so much for joining us today for this Behind the Science tour of Fordham Louis Calder Center, our 113-acre biological field station located just 25 miles north of New York City in Armonk, New York. This webinar serves as a way for us to say thank you to our supporters, introduce newcomers to the center, and share the center's unique initiatives and groundbreaking ecological research with members of the Fordham community. Today, Tom Daniels, Associate Research Scientist and Director of the center, will walk you through some of the center's state-of-the-art facilities, faculty and research student projects, educational opportunities and programs, and much more. We encourage you to ask questions at any time throughout the presentation by using the Q&A function located on the bottom toolbar of your Zoom window. We will do our best to answer as many as possible in the time we have at the end of the presentation. With that, I'd like to kick things off by taking you on Tom's walking tour of the Louis Calder Center's beautiful campus.
Bear with me for a second here. I hope you're all bearing with me for a second. My name is Tom Daniels. I'm sorry for any delay this has caused. I'm new to this kind of thing. I do want to welcome everybody that's joining us today. When I was first asked to give a behind the scenes or science tour of the Calder Center, my first thought was that the people who want to go behind the scenes have usually at least seen the scene first. In this case, the audience would have been up to Calder already and have gotten a sense of what it is we do. I suspect a lot of you haven't had that opportunity to come up. And so I think it best that we do an upfront as well as a behind the scenes tour today. My aim is going to be to tell you about the station and answer any questions you might have and give you a sense of what it is that we do. Hopefully you'll get an opportunity to visit at some point. I should mention too that although I'm the listed as the director of the Calder Center, I'm actually the academic director. We do have a facilities director. His name is John Spaccarelli, and a facility like the Calder Center couldn't exist without maintenance of the infrastructure. I think that's pretty obvious, but I just wanted to make it clear that John's a very important part of this whole system. So here we have the 31 Whippoorwill Road entrance, and this is anyone visiting the station would see this as they come up. It's posted as private property. If you do want to come up, we do ask that you call and make an appointment. It's not really for everybody. It is, after all, a university facility. Now, this entrance is essentially the same one that you would have seen back in 1967 when the land was deeded to the university. And I'll show you what it looked like back then in a couple of minutes. This is an aerial view of the Calder Center. It's located in the hamlet of Armonk in the town of North Castle. As Liz mentioned, it's 113 acres in size. And by comparison, the main campus at Fordham is just 80 acres. So it's an appreciable amount of area in the suburbs. And it's comprised of about 50 acres of woods, 50 acres of fields, buildings, lawns, and roads, and a 10-acre lake. And we're going to take a tour through a good part of it this afternoon. This is the view from the top of Calder Hall, which is one of the buildings we'll visit. And on a clear day, you can see the Manhattan skyline due south of us in Armonk. Now, I have 45 kilometers north of Central Park. And for those of you that are not very keen on the metric system, that comes out to about 28 miles. And so we're pretty close. The bottom line is that we're one of the few field stations in the country this close to an urban center. And it's one of the really interesting characteristics of Calder. Now, this is our mission. It's a formal mission statement. I feel obligated to mention that we have a formal mission statement. And you can read it if you like, but I warn you, it's not really a page turner. And so what I'm going to do is tell you what I think our mission actually is. And it's these three things. The first thing we want to do is to help people understand the world we live in. And we do this by designing research projects that ask well-defined questions. And that's the point of our scientific staff. For example, if I tell you earthworms are wreaking havoc on forest soils, based on research we do at Calder, and you go home and see earthworms in the woods behind your house, you'll know that perhaps that forest isn't as healthy as it could be otherwise. And so that's really part of our research agenda. The second thing we do is based on something that I think we all understand. We all respond better to something that we experience in a positive way. So if you tell me this is the best scone I'll ever eat, it's not really going to have much of an impact if I don't eat it. And if I tell you that being in the woods is a really nice thing on a hot day because it's about 10 degrees cooler in the woods than it would be otherwise, it would be nice for you to take a walk in the woods and see that. And so you will then ascribe value to trees. The canopy is great, the shade is great, and it has an impact on your life. And so ultimately that can translate to what we think are conservation goals of the station. Our primary aim as educators is to make new scientists. And so this is first among equals as far as I'm concerned, because it's at the core of our mission to educate students. And so I'm going to come back to this shortly, but my point is that it takes scientists to make scientists. Now, first thing I want you to do here is take a breath. I don't want you to read anything. I only put this up as to make a point. And the point is that there's complexity in the world, and I'm making and in ecology in particular, every study, every story in ecology deals with space and time. When you think about it, we're three-dimensional organisms which is the spatial component, with a lifespan, which is the time component. Populations, communities, ecosystems all have four-dimensional stories to tell. And so the story of the Calder Center is no different. And to put our current work in perspective, I think I have to give you a few minutes to tell you about the history of Calder. It all starts with Louis Calder. He was born in New York City in 1879. And at the age of 17, he began working for the Perkins Goodwin firm. It's a paper, pulp, and marketing company that was in New York City. By 1922, when he was 43 years old, he had become president of the company, and he remained there until his death in 1963. During that time, he revolutionized the paper industry by realizing that Southern pine could provide more pulp in a shorter period of time than typical hardwoods that were the foundation of paper production before then. He also founded Southland Paper Mills in 1940 to grow that pine. And because pine has a lot of resin, he was responsible for supporting research into the chemistry of removing resin so that paper could actually be produced. Now, apparently in his spare time, he also started Kesbeck Oil during World War I. And he opened a series of drive-in gas stations. And this was a new enterprise at the time in New York City. He later sold Kesbeck to Standard Oil of New Jersey in 1931. And so I think we'd probably all agree that Louis Calder was something of an entrepreneurial superstar of his day. Now, in 1921, just before he became president of Perkins Goodwin, he bought the summer estate known as ROCKMOOR for the princely sum of $1.5 million. Now, for those of you that are finance-minded, $1.5 million translates to about $22 million today, given inflation. It was not uncommon for the wealthy to have estates on high spots overlooking scenic vistas, and coincidentally, the rest of the population. The Calder Center is at about 680 feet in elevation. It's one of the highest points in Westchester County. I should mention too that the original property was also about 10 times the size of the current 113 acres. The estate covered the entire top of the hill on which the station is located. But most of it was sold off prior to Calder's death to build homes and a golf course that's just down the road. Now, the picture on the left is a picture of a Calder hunting party. And that's Calder kneeling in front. He was a conservationist of his time. Hunting and fishing were common, as was a respect for those natural resources that sportsmen used and enjoyed. And on the right, you see a picture of the back of Calder Hall where the pool used to be. There was a pool. This photo is from 1967 by Sean FANELLI. Sean was the first graduate student to get his degree based on work at the Calder Center. And he took a remarkable set of photos. You'll see a few more of them as we go along that sort of mark the origins of the Calder Center once it became Fordham property. A group of the first graduate students at Calder is shown in the middle there. You can see Calder Lake in the back. To the right is the first director of the Calder Center, Dr. John McLaughlin. And you see the mission at the time was largely the same as ours today. At least three of the points are things that we've already talked about. But you see the third point, emphasis on aquatic ecology and pollution studies. Well, the mission of the Calder Center in terms of what studies it does or does not do is entirely at the discretion of our faculty. Their interests are what drives the work here, both in terms of the focus their labs take and in the research projects that students are working on. Because John McLaughlin was an aquatic ecologist, that was a primary goal of the work that was done back in the early years. Now, these are just some photos taken that first year in 1967 by Dr. Sean FANELLI. Dr. FANELLI ultimately became president of Nassau Community College. He was the president for 27 years. And then he became a dean of education at Hofstra. He's since retired, but as I mentioned, he was gracious enough to provide a number of slides for our 50th anniversary, which was a few years ago. And these are some of those pictures. So this is the 31 Whipple Road entrance back in 1967. And this is the picture today. And you can see it's substantially the same, except for the loss of some chestnut trees. And so we've done a pretty good job, I think, of maintaining much of the character of the land. What I want to do now is take you on an actual tour of the property now that the temporal component is finished. So the first building you see when you enter Calder is the Gatehouse. It's the home of our caretaker, who is Mr. Mike Lambros. Mike's often the first person anyone sees when they visit Calder. He's our jack of all trades. One of the things he does is serve as our unofficial greeter. As you can imagine, a complex of 13 buildings and several smaller sheds, equipment bays, and so on keeps him busy virtually all of the time. A little farther up the road is our administration building, the Carriage House, where Elisa Perron on the left, our assistant director, and Petra Del Val, our administrative secretary, run the operation. I have some input on matters, but frankly, along with our caretaker, these three are indispensable. Now, if we move further up, we see the first research building on site, and that's Calder Hall. It's the main building at Calder. It was the Calder family home when it was the ROCKMOOR estate. And this is a 20-room mansion that now houses labs of 3 faculty members, Drs. Louis, MUNSHI-SOUTH, and Clark. Yeah, you heard that right. We have 2 faculty members named Louis and Clark. Calder Hall also contains a seminar room for classes, a shared molecular lab, and these are some graduate students in the seminar room during a mammal study session where they're identifying skulls. This is the seminar room as well. Again, it's like a teaching space in Calder Hall. And here we have a picture of what used to be the library. We recently took out the library for obvious reasons. Stacks and stacks of paper journals are not really very efficient use of space anymore. So we converted it into a study space for our graduate students while maintaining some of the more important books that we had in the original library. As I mentioned, one of the first faculty members that we come across in Calder Hall is Dr. J.D. Lewis. Now, Dr. Lewis and his students are interested in how plants respond to climate change and urbanization. The Calder Center is one of a dozen or so sites along an urban-rural gradient that extends from New York City to Western Connecticut. And studies like this are possible because of our proximity to New York City. Here we see grad students checking under boards that serve as shelter for salamanders, and the project looked at the effects of a potentially fatal fungal infection on these animals and how it was that they were dealing with the fungus. These are students in Dr. Lewis's lab. And another of Dr. Lewis's grad students working in the greenhouse. Dr. Jason MUNSHI-SOUTH and his students have a range of research topics that include understanding how urban rat populations move about in the city, something that's garnered a lot of media attention in recent years. Overall, they're trying to understand the ecological and evolutionary impacts of large-scale human disturbance on wild vertebrate populations. Some of that work might involve a really close examination of rats, as we see in this. Here's a case where tissue is being collected to test for leptospirosis, which is a bacterial infection with human health implications. Much of the work, though, involves using molecular tools to look at evolutionary changes over time. And here we see one of his graduate students and a colleague of Dr. MUNSHI-SOUTH working on DNA library. Our third faculty member in Calder Hall is Dr. Alan Clark. He's primarily an ornithologist in my mind, though his interests run to non-avian reptiles, mammals, and even ticks, as we'll see in a second. So here we have one of his undergrad students who was involved in some mammal work. As part of a CSUR project, she was using specialized recording equipment to collect bat ultrasonic vocalizations that could then be used to identify the bats to species. Pretty impressive. This was part of a larger study in Alan's lab to understand how bats navigate through the region, particularly urban areas. Excuse me. Still, birds are the main focus, as we see one of his grad students recording vocalizations of catbirds at Calder. And this was during this summer when we had to limit what could and couldn't be done at Calder because of COVID-19 pandemic. What I'm happy to say is that Dr. Clark and his students have moved into the field of vector ecology as well. Here, one of his current grad students is examining a bird to collect ticks that will be used to help determine the role birds have in moving tick-borne pathogens. Now, I have to show you a little bit of the wildlife at Calder. It's a field station after all. And so here we have a thriving population of coyotes at Calder. And even though we often hear them, they remain pretty much out of sight most of the time. But with the use of camera traps, we can see them going about their business at Calder both day and night. We have some other inhabitants. This is a bobcat on a rock wall that was taken a few years ago. And this is a close-up picture of a bobcat that one of our past graduate students, Seth Ganshorn, was able to take just a few years ago. The ability of this animal to sort of be hidden in the background is pretty amazing. Here we have an individual wandering through one day a couple of years ago. Now, about 2 hours after this picture was taken, there was a report of a bear being spotted in Chappaqua, which is one town over. And I suspect it was this guy continuing his morning constitutional. We haven't seen him in a while, but we know they're clearly in the area. Now, Dr. Steve Franks isn't based at Calder, but his work and his students often use some of the resources, such as the greenhouse at the station. One of his grad students is actually living at Calder. Steve's research is investigating the genetic basis of evolutionary changes in flowering time in a particular plant, field mustard. And he's looking at how quickly those plants can adapt to changing climate. You'll notice that Steve's another of our faculty members looking into the effects of climate change on natural systems. And related to that, he's involved in Project Baseline, which is an NSF-funded program to collect seeds from a wide range of plants. They'll be stored and used for future genetic studies. Essentially, they'll form a time capsule of plant seeds that were collected before climate change continued even further. And here's a picture of some of his students working in the greenhouse. Now, if you were to leave Calder Hall, which is what we're going to do now, you would notice a clearing in the woods where there are 26 large tanks. They've been erected. They were erected a number of years ago. And by large, I mean 5,500 liters, or again, if you're not metric system inclined, that's about 1,450 gallons. Now, these are the ELF tanks. ELF is an acronym for Experimental Lake Facility. They were constructed a number of years ago under the direction of John Ware, who we'll visit shortly. Now, with a system of tanks like this, you can evaluate the effect that various water conditions have on populations of aquatic organisms. And here we see several of his students engaged in work on the ELF tanks very, very recently. Now, as we head down toward the lake, we come to the Alan J. McCarthy building, and this is the limnological lab. And if you were to look on the other side of this building, this is the view you'd see. It's named, the building was named after Father Alan McCarthy, who was a biologist at Fordham, who died at a very young age. And this building was constructed around 1970. It's the first building on site specifically meant to serve as a laboratory. This is the back of the building, and you can see its location is pretty special. We're just past the time of year when we might see something like this. The foliage this fall wasn't as colorful, but you can see in some years it's pretty spectacular. Now, the McCarthy Lab is the base of operations for two of our faculty. First up is John Ware, our former director, who guided Calder through a long period of growth and whose tenure as director of nearly 30 years accounts for most of the station's history. John works on numerous streams and lakes throughout the region, even conducting work on the Colorado River. He's responsible for starting the CSUR program, something I'll tell you about shortly. And a few years ago, he started offering a 2-week intensive summer workshop on algae identification that has brought students from all over the world to Calder. In addition to the work we saw earlier in the ELF tanks, he's got a graduate student who's sampling here, taking water samples from Casino Lake in Queens, and an undergrad who's working on a project as well up at the ROUTH house. Now, John Ware took this photo of an egret on the back porch of the McCarthy Lab building a while ago. He has one of the best views of Calder from his office. Now, last year, I was walking along the northern edge of the property and came across a great blue heron. So in addition to the various ducks and geese we routinely see on the lake, occasionally we see some truly spectacular birds. Dr. Craig Frank's lab is also in the McCarthy, and his work on hibernation physiology and food storage behavior has him dealing with chipmunks here and other types of squirrels in the Western US. He's another one of our faculty members looking at the effects of climate change, in this case, how it affects hibernation. So you can't talk about food storage behavior in rodents without talking about chipmunks. And that's one of the primary animals that Dr. Frank works with. Here are some students working in his lab. And here is a bat with white nose syndrome. Now, this is a large focus of his research right now. White nose syndrome is having devastating effects on bat populations. In North America, for example, it's caused at least 6 million deaths. And it's known to infect at least 11 species of bats. Now, work in Craig's lab has begun showing why some species are more susceptible than others to this fungus. That information has important implications for conservation of bat species. Now, one of the older buildings on site is the lodge, and it's actually located also on the southern shore of the lake, right next to the McCarthy lab. The lodge was built by Calder in the 1930s to serve as a hunting lodge. And 5 years ago, we started a renovation of the building so that it could serve as a teaching space. And this is what the building looked like before, after we had emptied it of the grad student offices that were in there. And the picture on the bottom shows what it was like afterward. Here we see John Ware teaching at the first summer workshop at Calder in 2016. Now, on occasion, we see something very unusual at Calder, and if we're lucky, we have a chance to record it. You may not notice them right away, but there are 4 bald eagles and some trees overlooking Calder Lake. This photo was taken about 7 years ago, so you get a sense of how rare these events are. And there are the eagles. Now, it has to be something pretty special to get 4 bald eagles to sit over a frozen lake in the middle of winter. And it turns out there is, at least to a bald eagle and to a biologist. A deer had been killed overnight by coyotes, and the carcass was being scavenged by the birds. You've all heard the story of how Ben Franklin wanted the national bird to be the turkey and not the bald eagle, because eagles will stoop to scavenging if the opportunity arises. I guess Franklin thought they were birds of low moral character, but they have to make a living like anything else. And here we see life and death played out at Calder. And remember, we're not that far from New York City. This is a picture I took 6 years ago. I don't believe we've had a winter as cold as this since then. The days when we could reliably count on Calder Lake freezing over long enough to allow this type of movement by deer, or even the ice skating that we saw back in 1967, may be much less common in the future. I have to mention Dr. Yvonne Heckele. She's not based at Calder, but her research interests are quite broad. And she has mentioned mentored students at Calder, especially during our CSUR program in the summertime. Her work also focuses on the effects of climate change on wildlife populations, albeit over a broader time scale than the rest of us. This is another Calder resident. It's a saw-whet owl. I just think the picture Picture's nice, and I thought you'd like to see it. All right, the last big stop on our tour is my home away from home, the ROUTH house. It's the location of the Vector Ecology Lab and the New York State Department of Health Regional Medical Entomology Lab. So I have to make that clear. Our lab is a joint effort between Fordham and the State Health Department. And so we do a variety of different kinds of studies, both applied and basic, given our respective priorities. For the health department, it's surveillance, and for Fordham and our grad students, it's generally basic ecology. The ROUTH house was built in 1969 by Joseph P. Routh. He was instrumental also in providing funds to the biology department down on campus. So I'm on the left, and Dr. Rich Falco, my colleague, is on the right. Rich and I have been working together since 1985, and our research focuses on the population ecology of ticks, notably the black-legged tick, Ixodes scapularis. And so we have a picture of a questing female black-legged tick, and we also have a picture of marked ticks. One of the things we do is a mark recapture study every year to evaluate the nymphal tick population. So these are just some pictures of marked ticks. Now, one of the things we do, we've become interested in out of necessity, is the fact that we have some newcomers to the country invading potential vectors. This is the Asian tiger mosquito, which has the ability to vector a number of things that we're concerned about. It's a potential vector of dengue fever virus, yellow fever virus, and dog heartworm. West Nile virus has been detected in this species. I don't know of any cases where West Nile virus has been transmitted by this, but because it has the ability to be a vector, we have to keep an eye on it. So it still bears watching, which is what we're doing. And this is a newcomer too. We have another species of tick to contend with, the Asian longhorn tick. It's been in the United States for just about 5 years, and we're now routinely seeing it at Calder, though still in low numbers. Most abundant areas in the region are in green spaces in the south of the county, believe it or not, in Yonkers. It rarely bites people, but we don't know if that'll change. Now, Fordham became a part of the Northeast Regional Center for Excellence in Vector-Borne Diseases a few years ago. A group of centers of excellence that are funded by CDC to address the growing concerns of vector-borne diseases worldwide. The Northeast Center, of which we're a part, is only one of 5 nationally. Now, our lab's role is to host a vector ecology boot camp for 1 week each spring at Calder. Applicants from throughout the Northeast region are selected to come for the week. They stay on site and they learn all that we can reasonably teach them in that time, so that they can return to their respective universities and health departments with the tools to begin their own vector surveillance program. And so here we have a class being conducted in the lodge. And field experience is a bit of an undertaking, even with a large group of volunteer instructors like this is Dr. Scott Campbell, who helps us with these components. The students get to take part in field collecting that they'll do when they get back. I have to admit, it's an exhausting undertaking, but once it's over, we breathe a sigh of relief. All right, so most of the tour part is over. I've shown you the major buildings, except of course for the cabin on the left, lower left, that's our residential building where grad students live, and where when we have projects in the summertime that require residents, we have the students stay in there as well. And on the left, we have a relatively new greenhouse. Well, we've undertaken a number of changes over the years to make things more efficient. So we renovated the carriage house in 2014 to become the administration building. The Lakeside Lodge I already showed you was converted into a teaching lab space, and it opened in 2016. And we renovated the former library at Calder Hall 2 years ago. Some of the things that we do to help promote research here is that we offer competitive graduate student research grants. And so the grad students have to submit a proposal, and we generally fund them from somewhere between $600 to $1,000 out of our budget. It's money well spent. We also fund undergrad research assistants in each lab. And the NSF and Fordham funded CSUR program is a critical undertaking. I'll talk a little bit more about the CSUR program in a moment. And the public health training, which we just talked about, is a relatively new thing. We just started it a few years ago, along with summer intensive workshops. The one that has been ongoing for the past few years, except last year, is Dr. Ware's algae identification workshop, which I already mentioned. These are just some statistics giving you some sense of how productive the faculty have been over the years. Undergraduate research clearly is a priority. Everyone's working hard here for the most part. The CSUR program, I'm just going to give you the highlights here. It's been ongoing since 1998. We couldn't do it last summer. But generally 5 to 10 students live on site for 10 weeks and they live in the Calder cabin. It provides an opportunity for undergrads to really become immersed in research. Every student has a faculty mentor who takes them into the lab. They work out a project that can be done in the 10-week period. The students did help design it. They carry out all the work. And then ultimately they have to collect the data, analyze them, and prepare an oral presentation and a poster. The entire program ends with a formal research symposium on campus. And so it's really an opportunity for future scientists to get their first experience conducting serious research. We do some outreach in the form of our newsletter. Project True, which I don't have time to talk about, is really a fantastic tiered mentoring program for STEM students. I believe the funding for that is ending shortly. But it's run by Drs. Louis, MUNSHI-SOUTH, Clark. Dr. Jason Loisio was instrumental in getting it up and running as well. Improved website and social media presence is always something that we want to do. And collaboration with EMA, which is the Environmental Monitoring and Management Alliance, is something that we're continuing to work on. And they have, it's a consortium really of other institutions that have very similar goals in terms of conservation and educating public about science. One of the big things we have to do is forest remediation at Calder. Now, I didn't talk about this, but the fact is that the forest we have at Calder is not the same as it was 30 years ago. It's a function of the fact that things change. Ecology is dynamic, landscapes are dynamic. We feel that it's important to have some kind of landscape management to help control invasives and also to help us with the pollinator garden, which I'm going to show you in a second. We're continuing to do long-term ecological studies. Our tick study, for example, is over 35 years old. It's the oldest field study of ticks in the nation for this particular tick, black-legged tick. And of course, fundraising and getting grants is always important. Now here we have a lovely assortment of invasive plants that are doing quite well at Calder and other forested areas throughout the Northeast. These aren't the only species, but you can see at the top left, we have garlic mustard. To the right of that, we have Japanese knotweed. Lower left, we have Japanese barberry. And to the right, we have Japanese stiltgrass. You notice there's a theme here. These are all invasives from Asia. You probably know that a lot of these species were introduced in the United States as ornamental plantings for residential use. But often invasives are accidentally introduced when other populations or other products are brought over in trade. And the invasives aren't limited to plants, as you saw when we talked about the Asian tiger mosquito and the Asian longhorn tick. But the plants are having a huge impact on the landscape of Calder, and remediation efforts have to be a priority in the coming years. Now, the elephant in the room this year has been SARS-CoV-2. We've all been affected by the coronavirus pandemic, obviously, or we wouldn't be having this virtual tour. I'd simply invite you all to come up to Calder and see the center in person. And I hope we can do that sometime next year. Our faculty and students have done a remarkable job of continuing their research in spite of the restrictions on their activities. Ecology is a collaborative endeavor, and one of the goals of our housing at Calder is to foster a sense of community. The students are helping each other in various projects. That's an important part of working at a field station. While that's been difficult over the past 9 months or so, as you saw by the photos of students working in Alan Clark's lab, for example, it can still be done. It's all just a bit harder. Our primary goal is to keep everyone safe while we're doing the work that needs to be done. So you can see, I just have a list here. We had to cancel our identification workshop, our vector ecology boot camp, our CSUR program. And we couldn't offer undergrad opportunities to work in Calder labs. That is all hopefully going to change for next year. Now, if SARS-CoV-2 is the elephant in the room, global warming is the titanosaur in the room. It doesn't take a PhD to understand that the world we're experiencing now is not the same we grew up in. And that it won't be like it is now, even a generation from today. We'll get coronavirus under control within the next year, I have no doubt of that, but it will take decades to address the impacts of global warming. Our species is not good at dealing with some issues, and time is one of them. We have trouble grappling with problems that extend beyond our own lifetimes, but we can learn. You know, a survey conducted by the Pew Foundation just a couple of years ago showed that the US is the only developed country in the world that still debates the issue of climate change as a result of global warming. I won't go into why that is probably the case, but the science is clear, and the work of the Calder faculty that I mentioned earlier supports that. We can't take our eyes off the ball. We try to do work all year. Hopefully we'll be able to continue doing that. One of the initiatives we also want to do is a phenology trail. Phenology is the study of relationships between climate and biological phenomena, such as migration and breeding of birds. And so a nature trail along which specific tagged plants are observed throughout the year, and important events such as sprouting, growth, flowering, fruiting, and die-off are recorded, is really the goal of a phenology trail. And the result would be a record of life cycle of various species over time. These are really important data to be used in terms of understanding the impacts that climate change is going to have on our natural systems. The pollinator garden, I probably mentioned this before, is something that is one of the ways we're trying to reclaim some of the land at Calder. And so, and I realize I'm moving a little late here, but I'm almost done. The pollinator garden is an attempt to reintroduce native species after clearing out invasives. And this is a picture of what that area behind Calder Hall looked like before we cleared it out. And you can see it's a mess of mugwort and largely Japanese knotweed. And we were able to clear it out over the last 2 years. We did a solar insulation project. I don't have a picture of that, but we put plastic down to kill off as much of the invasives as we could using the sunlight in the summertime. Recently, we've been able to clear it out, and we've actually begun planting we planted a holding crop last year to keep the invasives out. And we're about to put down native seeds in the next couple of weeks to get the pollinator garden up and running. Now, it doesn't hurt to have friends. And so I think we can move forward with the help of others. Volunteerism is really important. We'd like to have volunteers who would enjoy nature while they help us collect data that could be really useful. And we're planning a BioBlitz, which is a relatively large-scale project where you have a bunch of people come into a site for a day or two, and all of the species that they can find are collected if necessary, or at least identified. We can do a lot with photographs. And we get a better sense of the different kinds of species that we have on site. And it also helps us when we do citizen science like this to collaborate with other organizations because they're doing similar kinds of things. So the Calder Center is important for a variety of reasons, and they're listed here, and I'm not going to mention it. I just want to tell you that we have had over 100 graduate students get degrees from work at Calder. And we've had hundreds of high school students as well, which I didn't mention, learn to do science. Environmental stewardship has never been more important. And I think you'd all agree that a science-educated populace is really needed if we're going to have a generation of problem solvers. I feel very strongly that Calder Center has the resources, the physical and personnel resources to help bring along this next generation of environmental leaders. I just want to close by saying, by telling you a little bit about, or just mentioning a quote from Baba Dayoum. He was a forestry engineer in Senegal. He presented a paper in New Delhi at the International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources in 1968. And the quote is, I think it resonates with a lot of us. In the end, we'll conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught. And really, that's kind of our goal. It all starts with education. That's why the Calder Center is here. So this is the gate you came in. It's the gate you're now going to leave. And I bid you all a good day, and I hope everyone is well. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Tom. This was a wonderful presentation and informative and engaging. And to that end, we do have several questions for you. So if you would like, I can start with, it seems like opportunity is the word of the day. A lot of folks have asked, how did they get involved at Calder, volunteer-wise? A lot of people have asked about undergraduate programs and opportunities. So maybe let's start out with volunteer opportunities, because I know you had just mentioned that.
Yeah, one of the things this is a work in progress, and I want people to understand that everything got put on hold, or large part of what we do got put on hold over the summer. As I showed you, we had to stop a few things. The plans we're making now for the Bio Blitz, the pollinator garden, we will continue to the best of our ability. But the phenology trail, for example, these are things that we want to get started, hopefully in the springtime. And so we'll begin collecting names and phone numbers and contact information for people who want to be involved in these things. And then we will keep them apprised of how the projects are going and what our plans are over the next 5 or 6 months. And so I would just encourage everybody to contact me directly. You can certainly send me an email at my Fordham address. You can call the Calder Center and speak to Elisa Perron, who's the assistant director, or you can send us an email at the Calder Center email address as well. And we will begin making up a list of people who want to help. And at some point we'll solicit, well, what are your interests? Are you more interested in the Bio Blitz? Are you more interested in the phenology trail? And we'll try to tailor that experience to what people are interested in. So it's something that we're just really getting started.
Excellent. Well, hopefully they'll be able to get started sooner than later, given the current landscape. But I did, for everyone, put the General Calder Center email address in the chat, as well as their website. So you can definitely stay tuned for more information for volunteering and getting involved. Shifting more to a student and academic focus, we have a few questions about, are there certain prerequisites required to study at Calder? Do they stay at Calder for the whole semester?
That would depend on the project. When we have individual labs, and we try to provide money to each lab to hire 1 or 2 undergrads, for example, to work in their lab during the semester. And so their students are simply coming up on the Ram van or driving up to Calder on whatever schedule they have worked out with their mentor, their faculty mentor. They come in, they work in the lab, they go home. They're not residential. The residential program is the CSUR program, which we only fund in the summertime. It's a 10-week program. We obviously couldn't do it last year. And we solicit applications for that. And so because it's important for us to have a student assigned to a lab, we can't have 5 people wanting to go into John Ware's lab, for example. We have to sort of pick and choose who would be more appropriate for a particular research project in a particular lab. And so that's a little more competitive. But those students do get, when they are selected, they do come up to Calder, and they do stay at the cabin. If they're all Fordham students, they may or may not come up. They can come up on the Ram Van because that runs in the summertime as well. So again, it's going to vary depending on the project and depending on what the student is interested in.
Very good, thank you. You mentioned Fordham students and non-Fordham students. We actually did have a specific question about the CSUR program. Is that open to undergrads from non-Fordham students?
In the past,
sorry,
go ahead. I was going to say, in the past, it has been when it was NSF funded. It's not currently NSF funded right now. It has been in the past. Right now, it's being funded by us, the Calder Center. And so what we're doing is, because of that, because I should have mentioned, the Calder Center received an endowment fund from the Calder Family Foundation right after the 50th anniversary 3 years ago, which allows us to support 2 students with that. We then use Calder funds to support up to 7 students altogether, so up to another 5 students. And so because we've been using Calder funds the last couple of years, we've been limiting it to Fordham students. If we are lucky enough to get NSF funding again, we may open it up to other schools. But right now and for the foreseeable future, it's a Fordham program.
Understood. Now, do you have to be majoring in something in the sciences to participate in opportunities at Calder?
No, you don't. You know, if you're interested in coming up to the Calder Center and you're a student in business, for example, I mean, you're certainly welcome to get on the Ram Van and come in and check in and look out, look the place over. If you're interested in doing a research project, generally it's going to be people who are interested in either chemistry or obviously biology. And so, no, I don't think that there's any, we have never had a case where there was somebody who was an art major who wanted to do a research project, but there's no reason why a Fordham student who was interested in that couldn't get something out of a visit to Calder.
Excellent, thank you. Stepping back outside the Fordham gates, we have a few questions about, does the Calder Center sponsor programs for the broader public, pre-college students? We have a couple of people asking about programs for high school students or even younger.
We have hosted high school students in particular labs. Generally, those are contacts that are made through the high school. They have, a lot of these high schools in the region have research programs for very good biology students. And those high school students are expected to find a research program outside of the high school that's going to allow them to come into the lab and do active research. And so we do host those students when we are asked about it. We don't actually go out and solicit those students. If there are students who are interested in working at Calder, generally what we ask them to do is to look at the faculty, what are their interests, and ask whether or not there's a particular lab that they would want to work in, and make contact with that faculty member. Ultimately, the faculty decide what research goes on here, and they decide who it is that works in their labs. My job really is to facilitate that research as a director.
Excellent, thank you. And speaking of kind of partnerships and collaborations, we have a couple folks who've asked, does the Calder Center partner with the nearby botanical gardens at all in the Bronx and even the American Museum of Natural History?
We do. There is a consortium with Fordham University that Fordham is part of this consortium with the Botanical Garden and the zoo, for example. And we have a number of faculty who are routinely working with collaborators in those 2 institutions. We have a number of graduate students who are routinely working at those institutions. We have students, for example, who leave Fordham and go to work immediately at the American Museum of Natural History. There's a lot of work. Dr. Heckela, who I mentioned earlier, has an office down at the museum. And so those opportunities to work in other places outside of Calder are there. It's just a question of making a contact with a faculty member, expressing an interest in a particular kind of research project, and then going from there. And if the opportunity is there, our students have had really good success in getting those opportunities.
Got it. And speaking of opportunities and partnering and getting the word out there, does the Calder publish its own scientific findings, or do the faculty and students contribute to more established scientific journals?
It's both. The faculty routinely write research articles, and very, very frequently their students are co-authors on them. And we
I've
have,
actually seen you on the news before.
what's that?
I've seen you on the news before.
Yeah, that's, we'll leave that one alone. Yes, when the opportunity to talk about ticks and mosquitoes is there, we obviously take it. But get back to your question, there is an undergraduate research journal at Fordham. Our students have had that research published there. They do present, as I mentioned, they do present their research at meetings, but we also provide funds. The Calder Center provides funds to undergrads who work at the Calder Center. Not a huge amount of money, up to $500. We provide travel money. If they want to take their research and print out a poster and get and present those results at a scientific meeting, we try to facilitate that. And so there are those opportunities as well.
Excellent, thank you. We have a couple of minutes left, but there's a bunch of people asking, are we going to be sharing the recording? Absolutely, we are going to be sharing it to everyone who registered. So we will likely tomorrow be following up with a link to the recording for future reference, and of course, contact information, things like that. So but since we have a couple minutes left, let's shift to something fun. Someone asked, have any movies or TV shows been filmed at Calder?
So have any what?
Movies or TV?
Yes, yeah. You know what? The lodge that I showed you was a log cabin on the lake. It's constantly being scouted by people from television shows in the city and from without. And there was a movie not too long ago, and I can't remember the name of it, where they were there for several days, and there was another one where they were there for several days. I have to tell you, it's kind of disruptive. The place they want to be is on the lake, and it's right next to an active lab, which is the McCarthy lab. And so whenever we have them there, it's a bit of an ordeal. And we just got a request very recently for another scouting group to come up. I think they want to film an episode of Law and Order, one of those shows from the city. And I think they thought the cabin would be a great place. We're in the middle of a pandemic. And so one of the things we cannot allow right now is a whole bunch of people coming up and leaving and coming up and leaving. It wouldn't be good. It wouldn't be healthy for them. And but that's their business. But my concern is we have people living at Calder, and I don't necessarily want that kind of activity, making it more difficult for them to stay healthy. And facilities obviously is the one who brokers all of this, and they agree 100%. So yes, we have had people come up. They do film on occasion. I'm not a big fan of it, but it happens, and we'll see what happens when the pandemic breaks.
Definitely. Well, I understand the interest, but I wouldn't want anything to get in the way of science. So
I couldn't agree more.
One last question. What do you most enjoy about your day-to-day, going to the center, working, doing your research?
You know, I've been actually working on the property since 1985. And so it's a long time. And I can tell you that it never gets old. Every day there's something different. And I tried to bring that out a little bit when I was talking about the fact that ecology is a dynamic. And I work in a field where things are expected to change, and they're going to change, and trying to track change and trying to understand change. That never gets old. It's always a mystery, and there's always something new to look at. There's always something different to see. And now we're faced with, like, as I mentioned, the fact that the forest, I said over years, you wouldn't know it to look at it. I showed you that aerial photo and everything is green. Everything that's green is not necessarily good. And so we've got a challenge now. How do we hold back the invasives and try to give the natives, which are not competing as well, a leg up? That's what the whole point of the pollinator garden. That's the whole point of trying the phenology trail. And so there's always something to do. There's always something different. And so, you know, I can't tell you what is the best part of it. It's all good.
Excellent. Well, what a great way to end. And I'm so glad that you are such a staunch supporter and Fordham employee and faculty member. And we're so grateful to you. And I will say we had one more question that is arguably one of the most important, shout out to Pat, who asked, how do we make donations to the center, which I'll go ahead and field for you. We will be sending an email likely tomorrow with the recording, as well as a link on how to give. And thank you for your wonderful question. There's definitely, as Tom said in his presentation, a ton of initiatives, programs, opportunities to support, and any and all gifts are welcome. You can also just simply go to the Fordham website, fordham.edu/give, and type in or look for the designation for Louis Calder Center. And that's another way to give as well. So I just want to say thank you so much to Tom, and thank you all for such an engaging conversation and your questions. If he didn't get a chance to get to yours, we will be sending Tom a report with all the questions for additional follow-up. We're so grateful to have had this opportunity to share Fordham's Louis Calder Center with you in this virtual capacity. Please know that under normal circumstances, as Tom has said, the center staff loves to welcome visitors and offer tours, and encourages you to keep in touch for future opportunities. To that end, Tom and his team are hopeful that next year they can have volunteers help collect data and contribute to a larger effort to track the effects of climate change through the pollinator garden, phenology trail, and a bio blitz. I put the email in the chat for more information, caldercenter@fordham.edu. Again, we cannot stress how crucial your support is to sustaining and cultivating research and educational opportunities for our Fordham students. The center is always seeking donor support for its plethora of initiatives and programs so that they can further their important mission of supporting scientific and interdisciplinary research in ecology, evolution, and conservation. Many thanks again for your consideration and support. Like I said, our team will follow up with a recording of today's event. Please keep in touch with the center, fordham.edu/Calder Center. And you can actually follow them on Twitter @LouisCalderCTR. They're very active and give some great scientific updates. So thank you again to our presentation extraordinaire, Tom, and thank you all again so much. And we hope to see you very, very soon in person or otherwise. Have a great rest of your day.
I just want to say, echo that. Thank you very much for your attention. I really appreciate it. Hope everyone's well.
Appreciate you, Tom, and the center. Take care, everybody. Thank you.